Josh Neufeld.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for sending me this shirt, by the way. I want to thank SUNY Brockport, M&T Bank, President Halstead, Aaron Rickman, and Marcy Essler, and the entire selection committee for inviting me here to speak with you about AD. And thank you all for coming. It means a lot. Especially because 7 years now down the road, students like yourselves are staying connected to the events of Hurricane Katrina and the city of New Orleans. I'm going to talk a little bit about how AD came to be. In a lot of ways, it kind of looks obvious, like there's this through line, like first there was the hurricane, then I volunteered with the Red Cross, then I did a blog, and I self-published, and there was a webcomic, and a published book. It all makes perfect sense, right? But of course, it didn't feel like that at the time. Cheesy as it may sound, the project started with a human response to an immense tragedy, and then one thing led to another, and then to another, and to another. And I guess, as Marcy was saying, that sort of epitomizes my journey as a cartoonist, because as she said, you know, I've been doing comics because it was my passion. It was something that I was compelled to do, and it's only really become my career since AD. So let that be a lesson to you. And as I look back, I realized that the seeds of AD go back more than 10 years, to September 11th, 2001. I live in New York City most of the time, and I was there when 9/11 happened. And since I don't have the training or the intellectual resources to understand catastrophe on a rational level, I always do what I can, which is I respond with my art. And I come from a tradition of nonfiction comic books. Some of my influences and inspirations include the late Harvey Pekar and his ongoing series American Splendor, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis. Maybe even some of you have seen some of these or studied them in high school or in other locales. And all three of those works use the memoir or the autobiographical form to explore issues like war, social change, and cultural history. And the most important thing about this tradition of comics is that they don't pull any punches. They portray the world as it really is, and it's not some kind of sugar-coated fantasy. The most important influence for me is Joe Sacco, who is like a war correspondent and a cartoonist rolled into one. And Sacco has done works of comics journalism about areas of conflict like the Middle East and the former Yugoslavia. And before Hurricane Katrina and AD, I was primarily known as an autobiographical cartoonist, as well as an illustrator for Harvey Pekar's American Splendor. I had also illustrated a fact-based comic book about the intrigues of the business world, which was called, ironically, Titans of Finance. So going back to 9/11, I was in my Brooklyn neighborhood visiting a neighborhood grocery store when the news of the first plane hitting the World Trade Center started to come in. I spent the rest of the day running around, watching the news, trying to reach my wife at her job in Manhattan, and watching the horrific scenes from the roof of my apartment building. In the following days and weeks, my wife and I volunteered. We walked through the dust-covered downtown. We visited the wreckage of the Twin Towers. I felt more kinship with the rest of New York City than I really did with the rest of the country as a whole. I didn't understand all this jingoistic flag waving, but I understood the loss and the terrible sadness and I felt the pain of the ravaged smoking scar in the heart of downtown New York. Like thousands of other New Yorkers, I emerged from 9/11 with two overwhelming feelings. One was powerlessness. There had been nothing I could do to stop this tragedy from happening. There were no survivors to help rescue, no blood that needed to be donated, and most unnervingly, I suffered from a crisis of interpretation. The destruction of my confidence in my ability to interpret and understand the world. I continued to suffer from a sort of PTSD for some years afterwards, continuously jumping whenever I heard a loud noise on the street and peering suspiciously at airplanes flying overhead. Not long after 9/11, I wrote and drew a short comic story about that fateful day. It struck me that the lyrics of that famous Kander and Ebb song, New York, New York, that everyone knows from Frank Sinatra, which is usually thought of as a triumphant anthem, the lyrics were actually weirdly resonant with the imagery and devastated emotions of post-9/11 New York. So I juxtaposed images from the things that I saw that day and that I did in the attack on the towers to create this comic called Song for September 11th. A little later, about 6 months after the attacks, I came out of a gym on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to witness a cloud passing over the Empire State Building. I talked before about suffering from a kind of crisis of interpretation. After all, if hijackers could fly a plane into the World Trade Center and knock the towers down, killing thousands of people in one moment, how could I count on anything I had ever thought of as real or permanent? So in my all messed up brain, with that cloud passing over the Empire State Building, it almost looked like the building was freezing and cracking and crumbling before my eyes. Something like that would never have occurred to me before 9/11. It's like a childish nightmare. But I actually stood there, frozen in fear, until the sun shone on the building again, which was still happily standing, tall and secure. And again, I used that moment to generate another comics piece called Post-Traumatic Skyscraper Anxiety. It wasn't enough, but it helped.